Welcome to Small Talk by Sfarim Chatter. I'm Nachi Weinstein. On this episode of Small Talk, I'm going to be joined by Sam Stonefield, who is the editor and translator of the new volume titled Haftorah Unlocked, Chanukah, which is the Haftarah of Chanukah from Zechariah, Rani V'Simchi, which is and this English translation, and also edited Haftarah with commentary is based on the commentaries of Rabbi Yehuda ben Balaam, Ibn Ezra, Radak, and Ibn Kaspi. So thank you, Sam, for joining me.
Thank you. Just sorry to correct you, but I didn't translate, but I did edit. That was my pleasure.
So so thank you for the clarification. So the translation here of the psukim, basically the way it's said is that in the beginning of each, you kind of split it up into scene 1, 2, 3, and in the beginning there's the psukim, and they have in Hebrew, and then the English translation. So that translation is not yours, but the commentary, if you will, and the selections of the commentaries, that's your work. Okay, so we'll get to that. So Let's start off. What can you tell the listeners about this book?
So we at Dat Press, the publishing house of the Haftorah. We want to produce Torah, and we want to produce Torah that is a received tradition of what we call the Sephardi Gaonic tradition, and to bring into the public light commentators that are maybe not as focused on than others. So that's why we have this rather eclectic selection relative for the general audience. And we wanted to focus on Haftarah as well, because we want to bring back a strong foundation of Limud Tanakh. And the Haftarah is a brilliant way to do this, because the Haftarah are an incredibly varied selection of pieces from across Nevi'im, and we want to showcase those. And we thought the best way, and there are so many Haftarah, and the best way to do that would be to focus first, for our first series, on the Haftarah of the Chagim. So here we are with Chanukah.
Okay, so why did you decide to start with Chanukah, and let's tell listeners about the Haftarah of Chanukah?
Yeah, with pleasure. So with Chanukah, because we had the idea, and this was the next Chag. So it was quite challenging actually to begin with Chanukah, simply because the way Haftarah work is that they're essentially commentaries. They reveal dimensions of the Torah. That we have the parasha, the normal Torah portion, and then the Haftarah is brought in order to elucidate and to give a new dimension and to balance out ideas in the Torah portion. However, with Chanukah, the challenge is that there is no Torah portion. We're dealing with a post-biblical festival, so even when it comes to Purim and Parashat Zachor, we have the Megillah, we have things based in Tanakh. However, when it comes to Chanukah, what are we commenting on? If the Haftarah is meant to be commenting, if it's meant to be revealing something, teaching us something, what is it doing? So that was our first challenge. But I guess before we get into that, the first thing we have to do when we're understanding Haftarah is to appreciate the Haftarah in its original historical and prophetic context. We have to understand it in its peshat, in its basis, in its foundation, and then we can appreciate how it's being used by Chazal to teach us and reveal to us things about what it's commenting on. So the Haftarah for Chanukah is from Zechariah, who is one of the great prophets of his time, the Second Temple period, the very beginning of the Second Temple period, which was a very unique and fascinating time in Jewish and biblical history. And it comes at a time where there have been great upheavals for the Jewish people. We have been through the destruction of the temple, the exile in Babylon, and now for the first time in Jewish and world history, we are returning from exile. And the reason this is such an important time is because this was unprecedented, not just in Jewish history, but in human history. No people has ever been exiled and returned to their land. And even though it was prophecy, the idea of it happening it's biblical in proportions for a reason. And hence this Haftarah. So the Haftarah begins with we split it in for convenience and in order to elucidate it, we at Dat Press split the Haftarah into 3 scenes. So the first scene is just the first few Pesukim, and it's sort of setting the stage of where the Jewish people, the Yehuda, is returning to Eretz Israel, and the biblical element of this is that the whole world is going to know about it, and God is going to return, and we're going to be planted back, and God is accepting us back, which wasn't a given. You spend hundreds of years being told that God's going to exile you and punish you. And the idea that God's going to take you back is also a bit of a startling thing to hear. But there's a second element to this, which is there's the particular part, which is us as the Jewish people, as Israel. And there is the universal element, which is the whole world is going to see this. The whole world is going to recognize God. And there's a consequence that they're going to cling to God. That what we do as a nation and our presence in the world and our status in the world has an effect on the world at large. This is something we see throughout Nevi'im, Achronim. We see this, for example, in Sefer Yechezkel, where he makes very clear towards the very end of Yechezkel that the reason God's going to return you back to Zion is because it's a Chilul Hashem. No matter whatever you do, the greatest Kiddush Hashem the world has seen in thousands of years is our modern return to Zion. The idea that God has not abandoned us, that the Torah is not, just some fairy tale, but this idea that God keeps his promise. So that's the first part of the Haftorah. And the second part is, then the second and third part are, the main characters of those are the two great leaders of the Shivat Zion, of the Return to Zion period, who are Zerubbabel Hanasi, the scion of King David, who is the governor of Judah, as made by the Persians of the time, and Yoshua ben Yehozadak, who is the Kohen Gadol. So these are the two leaders at the time. So the second scene in the Haftorah is about Yoshua ben Yehozadak. And we know from the books of this period, from Ezra and Nehemiah, that there was a lot of trouble when it came to the Kohanim. There was a lot of trouble of just what we'll call the Judean identity, and a lot of intermarriage, which Ezra had to deal with, and a lot of terrible things. And Yehoshua is told, there's this scene, this brilliant courtroom scene that the Navi envisions, where there's the Satan, the accuser, and there's a trial, and Yehoshua's on trial, and God rebukes the accuser, and he tells him, it doesn't have to be like this. We can clothe you again. You have these dirty garments. We're going to clothe you in these pure, beautiful garments. And if you take control, if you have a pure, and you redeem your service and those who are under you in the temple, then it's all going to go well. And this project of rebuilding the temple is going to be glorious and fantastic, and you're going to be successful. So that's the second scene. And then the third scene is probably the most famous scene that this Haftorah is known for, which is the vision of the menorah. And the main character of this scene or who this scene is directed at, even though there's the Navi, it's directed through the Navi to Zerubbabel. And God says, I want you to tell Zerubbabel, and he has this vision of this menorah, and this is actually the emblem for Jerusalem, for the municipality, which is the big golden menorah, and at the side of each of the menorah there are olive trees. And the oil is so pure that it goes directly from the olives straight funneled into the menorah. That there's no human intervention. It's God funneling the oil and the light into the menorah. And the famous words, he says, so tell Zerubbabel, lo b'chayo, lo b'koach, ki im beruchi, not by power nor by valor or strength, but rather through my spirit. This idea that all those things you relied on beforehand, all the things that your ancestors relied on when they were kings of Judah, it's about returning to God. It's not about the work of your own hands, as Moshe once described it in Sefer Devarim. It's about your relationship. It's about redefining what it means to have authority and power, and upon whom do we rely, so to speak. And that's the essence of the Haftorah. And then if we can return to the question of, okay, so that's all very well and good. Why Chanukah? And this is the second part of the booklet, which is I wrote an essay which essentially asked the question, why this Haftorah? Because this is really an incredible thing, because Tanakh is, if we're going to look at history, it's not a history book. If we're going to look at history through God's eyes, what does God have to say? And Chazal essentially did a similar thing. So if we want to comment on our times, we're going to choose a piece from Tanakh, and we're going to use that to comment on our times. And if we can appreciate that, we talk a lot about the battles and the Hasmoneans, but especially the miracle of the light, which we celebrate on Chanukah, and we have the Chanukah for. But we often forget that the war against the Seleucid Greeks, the Assyrian Greeks, went on for 25 years. It was a long war. And the first few years we reclaimed the temple, but to regain sovereignty, it took a very long time. And while the greatest of the Hashmonaim, of the priestly family who started the rebellion, were great men, Yehuda Maccabee, Yonatan, they were killed off during the war, unfortunately. And over the next 100 years, even when we've returned to, we had sovereignty in the land, it just got worse and worse until there was infighting, and that led to the Romans taking control. And, we start off with men called Yonatan and Yehuda, and it ends up with men with names like John Hyrcanus. It's not exactly what you'd call, a good Hebrew boys, so to speak. And we can see from Chazal that they didn't like, many sources, and there's few I quote in the booklet, they weren't fans of the Hashmonaim. And I think I can point out a few key reasons. The first one is they made themselves rulers. And this is terrible, because one of the great innovations of the Torah is the separation of powers. This idea that there is a king and there is a priest, there is the political realm, and then there is the realm of the sanctuary, and no the twain shall meet. They don't overlap. There is no god king. There is no priestly ruler. They're two separate domains, and they can't overlap into each other. And the Hashmonaim, they overruled that. Much to, I think, it was a shame, I think, in the sense of Jewish history, especially. I think that's partly what the Haftorah gets at, this idea of the first scene of the Haftorah talks about this hush. The whole world is about to see something beautiful and something amazing. And I think, again, we could have seen that with Chanukah, the sense of the restoring of Zion, and maybe even the restoration of the Davidic monarchy. And who knows what might have happened. And it was ruined, essentially, because there were people who fought, and they felt that they deserved something, and they set themselves up as rulers. And when we have in the Haftorah, even in the Haftorah, there is the scene with Yoshua ben Yotadak, the Kohen Gadol, and the scene with Zerubbabel. And when you set yourself up as rulers, it's all about you and your power and your glory. And the big message of the Haftorah is lo b'chai or lo b'koach. It's not about what your abilities are; it's about upon whom you rely. And I think that got lost with the Hashmonaim, and I think Chazal saw that. So that would be the gist, just in a nutshell, so to speak, of why this would be the Haftorah for Chanukah.
Yeah, and that's in the latter half of the book. I was reading it on Shabbos. I'm like, wait, why is that at the end, not at the beginning? But I guess you decided first to go through it after. Okay, so let's also talk about a little bit. You gave a very nice overview, really, about the Haftarah, but the four commentators. So you picked these four commentators. If you could just briefly, I think Ibn Ezra, listeners are familiar with, but who's Ibn Balaam and who is also Ibn Kasbi? Ibn Kasbi had a podcast on, but all of them, if you want to just briefly comment on who they are, and then why you picked these four. And if you want to if there's any example or that you have at all from the book.
So as you say, so Radak and Ibn Ezra are a bit better known to a general audience. Maybe not quite up there as Ramban Nachmani or Rashi, but Ibn Ezra is quoted by Ramban Nachmani and so on. But these are all, I think, people who are part of this Sephardi tradition that we want to bring to a wider audience. So they're also people, as I spoke before, about this idea of Peshat as the foundation. So even someone like Radak, he'll quote Midrashim, but his first priority will always be, what do the words mean? And that's true of all of these Mefarashim, especially Ibn Ezra, the sense of what is the grammar, what is the syntax, what do the words mean, which is the true meaning of Peshat. Let's build a foundation for understanding the text, and then we can bring several deeper layers. But first we're going to build our foundation, then we're going to build this house, that maybe we might call Pshat and Drash and this whole Pardes. So for the other ones, so I'm glad you brought up Ibn Balaam, because this guy, Rabbi Yehuda Ibn Balaam, is not known practically by anyone. But we discovered him recently at Dat Press, just unbeknownst to us, and where we started doing some translations on some of his work to bring him to a more general audience, because he's phenomenal. He's incredible, and he is part of this. He was born around the turn of the first century, so about 1,000 years ago, which I guess in terms of Jewish history is not so long ago, but it was a while ago. And he's this connection point between the Gaonim of the Sephardi tradition and then of the Rishonim of Rambam and Rashi and so on and so forth. And just to give you an idea of how great his comments are and how sharp and succinct he can be, is that Rambam, he does not tend to quote anyone in his work. But he quotes Rabbi Yosef ibn Bilam, and he talks about him, not at great length, but he says many great things about Ibn Bilam. So he's not someone to be ignored. When it comes to Ibn Kasbi, he is a Provençal from Provence in Spain, commentator. And again, it's part of the same Masorah of let's focus on Peshat, let's focus on also this idea of we can use worldly knowledge to explain the text. And so he was very well versed, not just in Torah, but in a lot of different trades and a lot of philosophy. And he uses these in, again, a very succinct way to elucidate the text. And we want to bring these commentators to a wider audience, and because they deserve our appreciation, and they have a lot to teach us.
Okay, who is the book meant for?
Oh, great. The book is, I think there's something in this for everyone. I think there are many different levels on which we can appreciate the Haftarah, and the importance of the Haftarah I can't ever stress, because it's the jewel of Tefillah on Shabbat and on the Chagim. It really is, because like I say, if I could tell you, okay, Chazal are going to give you a commentary of their own on the parasha or on the Chag, and they're going to do this not even in their own words. They're going to handpick from the thousands of words of Nevi'im, of the people who gave over the ideas and words of God. They're going to handpick them and use that as a commentary on the parasha, on the Chag. You think, what? I want to see that right now. Like, that's just, it's mind blowing. Like when you put it like that. So there's really something for everyone, and I think that tends to get lost because the parasha can be a bit long, and everyone's thinking about Kiddush already, and got stuff to do, and so on and so forth, and the Kiddush club and whatever. So for everyone, so for adults, for kids, for whomever, there are ideas here. There are ways of expounding on the Chag or the parasha that are important, and there, like I said, there are different depths. So here, when it comes to Chanukah, we had to delve a lot into the historic background. Because there isn't a parasha to open up. But the difficulty of the Haftorah for people is that when you're going to use when you're going to use the Nevi'im to comment on something, to understand and appreciate the Haftorah, you've got to be able to understand and appreciate that Navi. And unfortunately, not so many people are as well versed as maybe we should be in learning Nevi'im. So what we can do with books like this is that we can give a context, we can give a grounding for that book. So it's going to be very difficult to understand this Haftorah if you look at Zachariah and you go, well, I can just understand that out of context. We don't really expect to understand anything out of context anywhere. But what we can do with books like this is that we can explain, this is when Zachariah lived. This were the issues and the ideas he was dealing with and the people in the context, his historical and prophetic context. We can explain those, and then that makes it so much easier to understand. But that can often be very difficult when, if I'm going to pull out, I'm thinking of a Navi right now, of Yirmiyahu. Again, also a very difficult book to start on your own. So, on one hand, this book is for everyone, but for those who really want to start engaging in Nach and Nevi'im, I think the Haftorah are a great way to start, and that's one of the reasons we're going to start this series for the Chagim and on the Haftorah of the Chagim.
So I was going to ask you, there are future volumes planned.
Yes.
Okay.
I've
we'll stay tuned.
Yes, I've started work on the one for Purim, for Parashat Zachor, which it's more complicated even than this one, which I wasn't expecting, but it's good fun, and it gives me a great opportunity to get to grips with ideas I hadn't considered before. That means I get to interact with a lot of really great people and share and spread ideas and compare with, which is really good. But our plan generally is for the Chagim. So over the next few years, to go over as many of the Haftorah of the Chagim and elucidate them and explain them as best we can using some of the more less known commentators.
Is your plan to stick to these four, or you'd potentially expand to use some others?
So expand. It also depends that we don't, unfortunately, not all of these commentators wrote for all of Tanakh, and even if they did, sometimes their work gets lost. So it depends on the book. So for Parashat Zachor, which I'm working on at the moment, we're using Ralbag, because the Ralbag, comments there, but he doesn't have on Zachariah, and he's got brilliant things to say. Whereas, some of these commentators don't comment on some of the other stuff. So it really depends, but it's really on people who, also these guys tend to be more, these commentators who deserve our esteem and respect, they tend to be more succinct in the commentary, which makes it much easier to create a guide like this, where the idea is that it's a small booklet. This can fit in into a siddur, it can fit into your chumash and into whatever. And I think maybe once we've done a few of them, you might put it into a bigger book. But it's meant to be succinct. It's not meant to. Obviously, there's a tremendous amount of depth to all of these commentators and to all of the Haftarot. But we've got to start somewhere. We're trying to build foundations of learning Tanakh and the Haftarot, and we don't want to overload people.
Yeah, it's a small book. It's a few dollars. It's 45 pages. I'll link to it in the show notes. And thank you, Sam, for joining me.
Thank you.